Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to the Math Club. In this video, we're going to talk about inverse functions and how to find inverse functions using the function machine method. In the past videos, I talked about finding the inverse function by changing the places of the y and the x, and then making the y the subject again. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about finding the inverse function using the function machine method. Now, first, let's cover all the questions and work on A first. Now, A, y equals 3x. Using the function machine method, first, I'm going to write the function. When we write the function, we always start with x. So we write x, make it big so you can see it. So x, it's going to get bigger. First thing, we write x, and then we make an arrow, like this. We will look at the function, what is happening to the x. We can see that the x is multiplied by the 3. So I'm going to make a box like this, and put multiply 3 in the middle of the box. Multiply 3, because this is the first thing which is happening to the x. And then I follow the arrow. This is the only thing which is happening to the x. So I'm going to close the function like this, and end it with a y. So we start with an x, and then we end it with a y. In the middle, we write what's happening to the x in order. Now, I want to find the inverse function of this function. Finding the inverse function means I start again from the same spot I ended with, and I write x, and then I go to the opposite side. So I'm going to go this way, and then do the opposite of what's on top of this box. And because I have multiply 3 here, I'm going to put divide 3 here. So here, I'm going to put divide 3. Focus on the steps and focus on what you have so you can make the opposite of it. So divide 3. And then at the end, I'm going to end with an arrow like this. Has to be red. Make it the same. And then I write y. As I said, we first write the function, and we take the function from here. It means what's happening to the x. We always start with the x, and the x is multiplied by 3 to give me y. Now I start again with the x. I go the opposite way. I do the opposite of what's on top of it. Times 3 to the opposite of it is divided in 3, and then it will give me y. Now, to write the inverse function, I have to follow the steps of this inverse function. This is the function. This is the inverse function. Now I'm going to follow the steps of the inverse function. First, I write the x. So x, what's happening to the x? Divide 3. Very good. So the x is divided by 3. And when I say divide, it means it's over 3, like this. And then it will give me y, and it means equal y. So this is the inverse function of question A. And this is how you answer a question like this. Now let's move on to the next ones. We're going to follow the same steps. We're going to write the function, and then we're going to find the inverse function, and then we're going to write the inverse function again. Now let's move on to B. In question B, y equals x minus 4. We're going to do the same steps. We're going to start with x, as I said. We're going to do the function, and then we're going to make an arrow. When we do the function, we always start with x, and then we make an arrow. What's happening to the x here? Very good. Minus 4. So I'm going to put it in a box like this. I'm going to write minus 4. If you want to get the right answer of the inverse function, you have to write the function correct, and then do the inverse function. And then after minus 4, do we have something else? We don't. We only have the y. So we're going to make an arrow like this and a y. Now, after writing the function, we're going to go the inverse way and write the inverse function. So we always start with x, and then we make an arrow in the opposite way like this. And then we write the opposite of what's happening. So minus 4, what's the opposite of that? Very good. It's plus 4. And then that's the last thing. So we make an arrow and a y. So first we found the function, and then we inversed it, and we made the inverse function. Now we write the inverse function as an equation. This is the inverse function. Now we write it as an equation. So we start with the x first. So x, what's happening then? Plus 4. Very good. Plus 4. And then it will give me y. So equal y. And this is how you answer or find the inverse function of a function. You have to follow the steps so you get the right answer. Now this is B. Let's move on to question C. Same idea with question C. We're going to do what? We're going to find the function, and then we're going to inverse it. We're going to inverse the function, and then we're going to write it as an equation. Now, y equals x divide 2. Now, let's write the function together. As I said, when we write the function, we always start with x. And then we make an arrow like this. What's happening to the x here? Very good. It's divided by 2. So I'm going to put it inside a box like this. Divide 2. When you write the function, you have to follow the same steps that you have in the equation. Don't make up any steps from your head. Always use the same steps that you can see. Here, I can see that it's divided by 2. So I'm going to write divide 2 like this. And then nothing else is happening. So I'm going to make an arrow like this. And I'm going to write y at the end of this function. This. Now, after finding the function, I'm going to find the inverse function. And to find the inverse function, I come under the y, put an x, and then I'm going to go the opposite way, this way. Now, I'm going to do the opposite of what I did before. This one is divide 2. What's the opposite of divide 2? Very good. It's multiply 2. And then I'm going to make an arrow like this. Nothing else is happening. So I'm going to put y again here. Focus. X, Y, X, Y. You start with an X, you end with a Y. And then you start with an X again, and you end with the Y at the end. Now, after finishing the inverse function, you have to take it and write it as an equation. To write the inverse function as an equation, you always start with the X and then follow the arrow or follow the steps. What's happening to the X here? Very good. Multiplied by 2. That means I'm going to put 2 at the beginning. So it's going to be 2x. And then it will give me y. It means equal y. And this is the inverse function of question C. So always follow the steps. You'll get the correct answer. Now, let's move on to question D. In question D, same idea. We have a function. We're going to write it as a function. This is the equation. We write it as a function. Find the inverse and then write the inverse as an equation. First, let's write the function. As we said, we start with an x, and then we make an arrow like this. What's happening to the x? Very good. Plus 5. So I'm going to put it inside a box like this. When you do the function machine, focus on the steps. So here we have plus 5. And then I'm going to make another arrow like this. And then nothing else is happening except the y. So I'm going to put y here. Now, after finding the function, let's find the inverse function. To find the inverse function, we put x here under the y. And then we go the opposite way that we came from. So we go this way. And we do the opposite of what we did before. So this is plus 5. And then it's going to be minus 5. And then at the end, I'm going to make an arrow like this. And it will give me y. Now, after finding the inverse function, I'm going to write it as an equation. Focus, guys. We always write the inverse function as an equation, not the first function, because the first function is this equation. The inverse function, I'm going to turn it into an equation like this. I always start with the x. What's happening to the x? Minus 5. Good. So I'm going to put minus 5. So put the minus 5 after the x, not before the x. And then it will give me y, so equal y. And this is the inverse function of question D. Now, let's move on to the next one. Question E, same idea. We have a function or an equation, y equals minus 2x. In this equation, I want you to focus on this. Here we have minus 2 multiplied by the x. So the relation between -2 and x is multiplying. So focus on this step. First thing we do, we find the function, or we write the function. And when we write the function, we start with the x and then an arrow like this. What's happening to the x? Very good. It's multiplied by -2. It's multiplied by -2. So multiplied by -2. Focus on this step. So the whole thing, or the x, is multiplied by -2. So when I change the bigger sign or the stronger sign, which is the multiplication. I don't change the negative and positive. I change the multiplying sign. Now, after that, I make an arrow like this because this is the only thing happening to the x. So I'll put y here. Now, this is the function of this equation. Now, I'm going to write what? I'm going to find the inverse of that. So I'm going to put x here. I'm going to go to the opposite way like this. And then I'm going to make a big box like this. So what's the opposite of multiplying? Very good. It's dividing. So I'm going to make divide here like this. Focus on the steps. If you do the right steps, you'll get the right answer. So here, dividing. Dividing what? Very good. Dividing by -2. Because first we multiplied by -2. Now we're dividing by -2. Focus on these steps and you'll be okay. Now I'm going to divide by -2 like this. And then at the end, I'm going to get y. Now, this is the inverse function of this function. Now, I'm going to write the inverse function as an equation. So I'm going to take this, write it as an equation. I'll start with the x. I always start with the x. So x, what's happening here? Divide -2. It means it's over -2, like this. Over -2. I'm going to write it as an equation like this. So x is over -2. And then it will give me y equals y. And this is the inverse function of equation or function E. Now, let's move on to the last one. The last one is question F. This one is tricky. Now, first, let's find the function of this, okay? First, we write the function. We start with an x, and then we put the arrow like this. What's happening to the x here? Very good. It's multiplied by -1. So I'm going to make a box like this. Focus on this step, okay? So it's multiplied by -1. Let's put it here. -1. Now, I'm going to make this in a box so I don't get confused by multiply minus. So it's going to be multiplied by -1. Now, I continue my steps. This is the last thing which is happening to the x. So I move on and put y. That way, I finished my function. Now, I want to get the inverse function of that. So same steps, I'll put x under the y, and then I'll go the opposite way like this, and then do the opposite of this one. So the opposite of multiplying by -1 is going to be what? Very good. We said that multiplying is stronger than addition and subtraction. So we do the opposite of multiplying. So the opposite of multiplying is what? Job, dividing. So I'm going to divide by -1. Very good. -1. I'll put it in a box like this. Divide by -1. I didn't change the negative because I already changed the multiplying to dividing. I only changed one of the signs or one of the operations. And then at the end, it will give me y. Now, I found the inverse function of this function. I'm going to write it as an equation. And when I write it as an equation, I always start with, very good, x. So I'm going to write x and then divide -1. So it's going to be over -1, like this, over -1. Now, I'll make a line from division, like this, and it will give me y. So equal y. Now, when you focus on this, when you multiply any number by -1, it's going to be negative. So the answer will be -x equals y. And this is the inverse function of the function f. And you'll notice that the inverse function is the same as the first function. And this is how you answer a question like this. As I told you, first you have to write the function and then go the opposite way to find the inverse function and then make it as an equation. Follow the steps and you will get the right answer. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.